Okay, then the third thing I want to cover is dealing with manuals of operations. We did a little bit at the end of bylaws last year on manuals of operations very quickly. And I've gotten, or 2 years ago I guess it was, and I've gotten a whole series of different questions on them since. And so I want to try to answer those. By now you should have, 2 years ago we talked about how to write a child protection policy. So you should have that hopefully in your manual of operations. And last year we talked about how to update bylaws, and hopefully you've updated your bylaws and you have that in your manual of operations. So this year I want to talk about other things that would be in there. All right. In 2011 you'll remember that the denomination passed what's still called the new form of government. How long it can be called new form, I have no idea. But it passed the new form of government, which leads a lot to be spelled out by the congregation now, rather than what was used to be spelled out by the Book of Order. And the goal for that was flexibility. It wanted you to be able to make things that would work for your congregation, rather than having everybody have to do it in lockstep. So that was the idea that was behind that. All right? It's not a bad idea, but we've got flexibility and diversity. But where does that flexibility get spelled out now? What you choose to do has to be in your manual of administrative operations now. Every church is supposed to have one. Okay. So you'll notice, if you were here at the first session, how do you do notice for a congregational meeting? It's up to your congregation now. Where is that? It's either in your bylaws or your manual of operations. It's no longer spelled out by the Book of Order, as an example. So every congregation needs to have a manual of operations. What goes into your manual of operations? The first kinds of things that go in there are your originating documents. That includes your original charter that sets you up as a congregation, or your organizing covenant. If you're a really old congregation, it will be called that instead. If you originally have a list of charter members, you can put that in as well. That's fine. Your articles of incorporation. And for almost all of our congregations, you are individually incorporated. For some of our very, very old congregations, you were incorporated as part of presbyteries. But I'm talking about very, very old. So Revolutionary War and shortly thereafter. If you're begun after the Civil War, you were probably individually incorporated. You should have your articles of incorporation.
If there are multiple articles of incorporation?
They should all go in. They should all go in. Your deed to your property should be in your manual of operation. Your bylaws that you've now updated are originating documents that go in the manual of operation. If you have a mission statement, that's an originating document. That goes in your manual of operations. And a copy of your last annual report, if you do them. And I know some congregations don't, but if you do them, it should be in the originating documents. It shows you what the current structure is and what's happening in your congregation. That's the first part of your manual of operations. That's gathering things that you should already have. All right? The second group that should go in there are your documents pertaining to nominating and electing question on the first one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just can the deeds to property and the charters and all those be copies so that the originals can be?
Yes, the originals can be kept in a file. Okay. The goal of this, in the best of all worlds, what you would have is something that can be given to each new session member when they come on that says, here are all our policies. Read through it so that you quickly are up to speed and know what's going on. Or to a new minister who arrives, here are our policies, so the minister doesn't think there's this, and this is what's really in place in this congregation. It allows anybody to catch up quickly.
If your articles of incorporation are old and almost illegible, is there a way to have them officially transcribed and accepted?
You could have them officially transcribed. You could also, the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia loves documents like that, and they will try to microfilm them for you in a way that then makes them legible. They are happy to take not any old records, that's probably not accurate. They don't want your individual statements of who paid $5 every week for but most records, old minute books, old roll books, and they will microfilm them, and so you can access them when you want to, and that's what they do, and they do it for free and are happy to do it. So that would be another way to try, is to say, we're going to send you down our articles of incorporation. Will you make it legible and put it on this microfilm for us? And you can either access it and print. They can send you a printed copy. They can send you the link to the microfilm. They can send you a copy of the microfilm, whatever you choose.
But for the transcribed one, if you're putting it into
Then you're gonna need to have it notarized and so forth.
notarized,
Yeah.
then
Yeah, but you could do that. All right. What you
Where was that?
The Presbyterian Historical Society. It's in Philadelphia. It's a service that, so for instance, when a congregation closes, Deb is just going through this for us for the Greenbush Church. She's been chairing that AC. And when that congregation closes, all their minutes and records go down there so that they become searchable once they're actually microfilmed. And anytime we need to know, was somebody baptized in that church or was somebody married in that church, we just call down there and ask, and they quickly run a search. It takes them like 3 or 4 minutes and tell us the answer. So, but you have to sort through what you send down there, but you have that option, any of you, for any of your records. They don't need to be housed in your congregation. And in a lot of ways, they're fireproof. So they are much better than most of our congregations for where we keep historic documents. So you should all consider that periodically. And you can ship them down, you can put them in a car. Generally, when we have people going down, we take whoever's driving down there from the presbytery, we fill up whoever's car is going near there, and we've all taken turns driving them down to the Historical Society. Also, when the Board of Pensions meets regularly, they take them there, and so we send people who go to the Board of Pensions presentations with full carloads of documents coming down from our churches. So they're good ways to do it. Yeah?
Since you brought it up, genealogists love church registers. And the Putnam County Historian's Office has taken all of our registers and has transcribed them and put them online. So that
And give them back to you, or, okay, as long as you get them back, that's fine. That's another great way to do it if they'll do it. So there are lots of options of how you could make those articles of incorporation legible and in your book. And some of them won't cost any money at all.
On the articles of incorporation, a lot of times they're filed with the county, so sometimes the county archives, if you get lucky and get a clear copy.
Right.
And you'll have to certify seal it against the county.
Right. But South is not anywhere easily accessible in the county. So before you try it, it's not. So, but a lot of churches are. So these are the first documents. The second set of documents that you want are ones connected with nominating, electing, and installing folks. And this includes a description of the composition and the work of your nominating committee. It's not in your bylaws. Who makes up your nominating committee? How do they get chosen? In what way are they going to be representative of your congregation? Right? Are they going to be one deacon and one elder and one member at large? Or are they going to be 3 deacons and 5 elders and 10 members at large? You have to do it within the bounds of the Book of Order. You have to do it within the bounds of the Book of Order, but you can otherwise make up your own nominating committee requirements now. If you keep the nominating committee requirements that used to be in the Book of Order, you can do that, but you should be putting them in your own manual of operations now. Second thing, how do you examine those who are being elected to serve as ruling elders or deacons or trustees? What is the process? And you may say, oh, well, we get together and we ask them questions. But what we're looking at here is some process that everybody is treated the same way. And so everybody knows what's happening. So it's not when Wendy came up, she got asked 5 questions. When Sue came up, she only got asked 1 question. Well, everybody treats Sue so specially. It's just not fair, right? You're looking at everybody having a process. Do you have a process? And I've said this process can vary a huge amount. So the process may be bringing people in one by one and asking them in a set of 10 or 20 questions that you've got. It may be all the session being invited to a gathering with all the new ruling elders who might come on and sharing what is it you like about your congregation and what are you looking forward to. And so, depends how the congregation does it. Again, there's flexibility in the new constitution. So you outline how you're going to do it as your congregation. But you make sure it's spelled out so everybody is treated the same way when it happens. Yeah?
So you could have on file a list of questions
You could.
that everybody would get.
You could. If that's the way you want to do it, you most certainly can. Yeah, Brian.
This part is not supposed to be in your bylaws? Or can be, or?
This?
No, just this whole document you said.
This should definitely not be in your bylaws. Your nominating committee part could be in your
It's
bylaws.
not in bylaws, sorry.
Yeah, your nominating committee could be. How you examine the session should not be in your bylaws. It should only be in your manual of operations. All right? It's something that you want more flexibility to change. It may be different how you would examine somebody if you have 21 members on your session from how you examine them if you go down to a session of 6 people. And what you do may be very different. So you want some flexibility that doesn't, bylaws, remember, have to be voted on by the congregation. The manual of operations can be things that are passed by the session. And so you want more flexibility for that reason. Who else? Somebody else had a question over here? Okay, so those are the second things. The way in which you examine people, the procedures you may want to put down on how they are ordained or installed if there's something unusual that you feel has to be done. This is not just the regular questions. Obviously, if your installation is reading the questions in the Book of Order, then you don't need to put that down. Some congregations have very elaborate patterns. I know a congregation in our presbytery that has the requirement that the people are brought up and they are presented to the Board of Deacons, who then walk them up to the Board of Elders, who then escort them together up to the minister who asked the questions. If that's something that's important to you, it gets spelled out in your manual of operations in this section. All right. We have traditions. This is where traditions make their presence known, so people are not surprised by them. All right?
Susan,
Yeah.
can you also put in things like how you want people to do different jobs within the church, such as ushering?
Sure, that's going to be in a different section, but yes, it will be in there. Yes. Next section is personnel. This is the third section you can have. And you can put these in different orders. They don't have to be in this order, but these are the areas you want to cover, all right? This should include a position description for every church staff person, paid or volunteer. All right? So what do you expect your church secretary to be doing? What do you expect your choir director to be doing? What do you expect the person who is your superintendent of church school, who's a volunteer, let's say, to be doing? What do you expect the person, what's the job description for the person working with your youth group? Right? What's the person who is in charge of the flower committee? All right? What are they supposed to be doing? All right? So you put that in. You put a description of the forms you're going to use in hiring non-ordained staff. This includes any disclosure forms you're going to require them to sign, any background checks, etc. Why do you have this in? So that it doesn't become why are you asking me about a background check? I don't think you asked anybody else. Are you somehow being suspicious of me? Is that why I'm not hired? Are you discriminating against me in some way? Right. So what is the process you're using for hiring staff? All right. That goes in there. And it's a description. You don't have to put in every form. It's a description of the forms. We will require a background check. We will require, if you need a financial credit check, we will require. That's of each person being considered for hiring, right? Descriptions of how you're doing performance reviews and compensation reviews. How often are you going to look at how good a job your church secretary is doing? How are you going to look at it? Whose responsibility is it to look at it? Right? Who's going to bring it before the session? How are you going to decide whether people are being compensated fairly or not? Right? When? Whose responsibility is that? All right, so you're going to spell that out. And any other personnel policies that you have in here. All right. Some of these things, like for clergy, you automatically have these, right? Because COM requires them. So it's not for clergy as much that you can put clergy in here, but I'm really talking about non-clergy connected with the church. Volunteers and paid, you see, because it may be that you're going to require somebody who's going to be a volunteer working in charge of the youth group. You're going to require that they have a background check. You should anyway, because they're going to be working with kids. All right, and so you don't want them, why is it? It's in our manual. And so now that you're taking over this area, I know you've been a member of the church and you've been wonderful for 25 years, but now that you're doing this, we require this of everybody who's suddenly going to be working with our teens. Much easier than trying to convince the person when it's not there. Well, yeah, I don't suspect anything from you, and I know there's no problem, but would you please do this background check, right? It's in our manual. Committees and organizations should be spelled out in the next section. What's each congregation, what's each committee or organization doing? What are their tasks? If there's sequences of work they need to do? The finance committee probably needs to, among things, be keeping track of the expenses, right? And be keeping track of putting together a budget. If there's a sequence of when they should do these things, what is that sequence? If the flower committee is responsible for having flowers every Sunday, somebody needs to be telling them it's every Sunday, right? In their description. If the people who set up communion, whether it's your deacons or you have a communion setup committee or a subgroup of however, they need to know, what does that entail? What are they expected to do? That comes into this. So the description of each committee and organization, and it should include when they meet, if there are regular meeting times. Right? And I would urge you, having served on committees where there are regular meeting times and committees where there are not regular meeting times, better to have regular meeting times and have people know when they go on that meets at this time than to find out that every time they meet they can't make it because you've picked a time that they can't do. All right? So regular meeting times. Frequency of meetings if they're going to be meeting. So in the presbytery, for instance, our committee on ministry meets on the first Tuesday of every month. Right? Our budget, finance, and property committee meets on the second Tuesday of every month. Right? It tells people that frequently. Expectations of the people serving on the committee. You're serving on our deacons. We expect you to come to meetings, at least 9 out of 12 meetings a year. We expect you to be looking out for your deacon group if you have it, right? Looking out for this number of people, or checking up with this age group, or however you divide your deacons up. What is their task? People can't do what they don't know they're supposed to be doing, right? And if people are not doing it, it gives you something to say, perhaps now is not the time. You need to step away from this for now, without making it personal. These are the tasks. All right. Next section, finances. Okay. This would include a copy of the current budget, a description of how you do stewardship and pledging, whose responsibility is it, when does it happen, how do you ask people, if there's a process you've worked out. If there isn't, you should have gone to the stewardship part of the training today, because they will talk to you about why it's important to have a process there. Procedures for what happens on Sunday mornings with offerings. And this includes several things. How many of you do electronic giving at this point? Okay. It's important in two ways for the procedures for counting and depositing Sunday offering. This is, first of all, what do you do with cash that comes in? Secondly, how does the cash get together with the electronic givings? And the third piece of education is for the people who are going to be reading this who are doing the offerings each week, because they're going to get this, here's how you do the offering. And it needs to say, because I've gotten this question now twice, I think, maybe 3 times. People are having a hard time with electronic giving because they don't see somebody putting things in the offering plate. Oh. And so the ushers are glaring at them. Why didn't you put something in? Right? And they're not recognizing, because they're not aware of it, that there's also electronic giving. So in this part as well, you need to acknowledge that there are ways to give other than taking a check or money and putting in cash into an offering plate on Sunday. That's in some congregations we have largely moved beyond that or have partially moved beyond that. And that there are how that process works as well. All right? It just it's been interesting to have these questions. What do we do about that? We have congregations that are giving people slips of paper to put in instead because people have started to glare at them. Right, so
Just on the flip side, that conversation came up for a session meeting, one of the session people said that others might think it's a way to say, oh, I'm not putting in, I already gave to online.
it could be both. It goes both ways. You're exactly right. But we need to figure out, how does this work? And in this section, it was easy before. Okay, on Sunday morning, the usher goes and takes the money and gives it to so-and-so, and the two of them count it and sign the envelope, or whatever it is. It's a much more complex section that you need here now than that you had before to deal with it if you're doing electronic giving in any way. All right. Next section of your manual should be worship and sacraments. In this time of year, in the kind of weather we've had recently, one of the things that should be spelled out there is how worship services get canceled. Who makes the decision? Who? Well, how does the session make the decision? So it snows Saturday night, and Sunday morning there's 7 inches of icy snow on the ground. You call the session and have a session meeting?
No, we have a policy ahead.
How do you make the decision? All right. Who announces the decision? How do you let people know about the decision? And it could be weather, it could be for other reasons as well. All right. But you need to have that outlined here, among other things. This would also be where your instructions for ushers go and for your greeters, so that somebody taking on that job knows what they're doing, both in general for average Sunday worship and what happens in an emergency. So somebody comes in and falls and knocks themselves unconscious. What do the greeters and ushers do? Do they have a role? There's a fire that breaks out in your sanctuary. Do the ushers and greeters have a role? If so, what is it? What are they supposed to do? Who knows where the fire extinguishers are? Does it say in the section so that you have some idea? All right. If you have elders who are preparing and serving communion, or others who are preparing and serving communion, how does that happen? And pay attention for those of your congregations that alternate forms of communion. How does it happen if you're doing it with intinction up in front? How does it happen if people are being served in their pews? You need to spell out both, because often people know one but they don't know the other. If you have people who are assisting with baptisms, and a few congregations here do, not all of you do, but an elder who's assisting with baptism some way, what are they expected to do? Next section is membership. This would include the procedures for contacting and inviting possible members. How often do you have new member gatherings of one kind or another? What's the format to have them move from visiting to joining? Have you thought through that? How does that work? Procedures for removing names from the roll. How often do you clear your rolls? Who makes those decisions? Do you just sit there as a session and look at every name and think, all right, well, I haven't seen that person, let's take them off? Or do you have some group that's responsible for coming in, I'm recommending removing these people and checking out why they haven't been there? Who sends out the letters? Who does the various things for removal from the rolls? And then you also will have a section at the end that's miscellaneous but important information. And this would include, among other things, presbytery-related material. This would be how to contact the presbytery, for instance, how to put people on the presbytery's committees. And here's how you do that. You talk to Heather Benedict. If you have somebody who you would really like to have on a committee that you think would be great, you email her at that email address, and she will consider it. Either tell them their traits, that they really like numbers, or they really like to work with people and relationships, or whatever it is, or suggest committees if you'd like. So that information should be available to people. But you also want the presbytery material, information available to people. So if there's a problem with your minister, or if somebody has a question about something happening on the session, they can call and ask. You also want your insurance policies information there. That you can either have the policy or where it's held, but something that people know that if there's a problem, how to get in touch with somebody. So the minister's on vacation, they know where it is, but nobody else knows. And somebody has hurt themselves and you want to nominate, let your insurance company know right away. What do? Right? So some way to get in touch with insurance companies. Privacy issues. This is how do you share things like your joys and concerns? What are your policies on photos, especially photos of children? Are you going to put their names up on your Facebook page? Do you ask for parents' permission before you do those kinds of things? Do you, just straight across the board, what can you post on Facebook? What kind of membership information do you have? Can you sell your directory to somebody? So the body scanners that I was talking about before that we always get ads for, can you sell them your directory? Right. What are your policies as far as privacy? What is your sexual misconduct policy? You all have one now, or should. It should be in your manual of operations. Your child protection policy should be in your manual of operations. These should be two separate policies, right? What happens if... These are all in miscellaneous that we're doing now. Lawsuit procedures. You get a summons that you're being sued for a property issue. Who gets that and deals with it? Whose responsibility is it? Is it the clerk that has to make the first contact? Is it the pastor that's going to deal with it? Is it the person from finance? Who is it? All right? You all probably have an answer, but it doesn't mean that people will know. So how does that happen if you have a lawsuit that comes along? Does it matter on the kind of lawsuit that it is? Your policy around inspecting minutes and around inspecting financial situation. Who can see your minutes? Can anybody see them the minute they demand them? Can anybody see them within an hour? Can they see them within a day, a week? Can they never see them? You can't have a member of a corporation never see it. So let me start there. But you need some spelled out policy on who can see when. Church calendar of events. If you have annual events that happen every year, you always do your attic sale in June. You always do your garage sale in September. You do your fish bake in February. You do corned beef and cabbage on St. Patrick's Day, except we messed that up this year. Those things go down, right? And any other existing policies that you have passed as a session should be in your manual. This is a place where any policy that I may not know about because it may be your tradition, but any policy that you have passed should be put in. The goal of this is so that a new person coming onto one of your boards or serving in a new role can be handed either the page or a copy of the total manual and said, here's how to catch up to speed. Oh, you want to usher? Here's how to catch up to speed. Oh, you would like to be a greeter. Here's what you need to do. Oh, you want to teach in our church school? Here's what happens. Here's what your task is. People are more apt to volunteer to do things if they know what they're volunteering for. Most of our churches do a really poor a job of doing that. Right? We don't get the words out of what you're expected to do. Well, we'd be a greeter. Sure, just stand in the back and say hi to people. Well, that's probably not going to really help, right? So manuals of operation, while giving you flexibility and allowing session to change them, put that together for people. And one of you, probably you as the clerk, when you create your manual, will need to read back through previous session minutes because there may be session policies that have been passed that have just been passed and they're sitting there 5 years ago, but they haven't been put together anywhere. And you know it, or maybe you don't know it, or maybe only one person on your session knows it. They need to be put into your manual of operations. All right? So this is a task that I know most of us are not going to complete in the next month or so, but it is a task that every session should be moving towards completing. So what I'm sort of charging you with is rather than going back with a specific document you need this year, which is what I've done in the past several years. You need bylaws, or you need a child protection policy. What I'm charging you with is going back to your session this year and coming up with a plan on how you're going to develop your manual of operations. That's what I'll be looking for next year. Okay. What is your plan? Some of you may have it already done, in which case you got a really easy year. But if you don't, how are you going to get these things together? Okay? How will you get your manual of operations together? Okay. I should say a couple things. Several congregations in our presbytery have more than one language in the congregation. If that's true, your manual should be in both or as many languages as you need. Completely in both, or completely in 3, or whatever it is. All right? Because it doesn't work to have, okay, half of it's in Spanish because the person who's working on that committee's main language is Spanish, and half of it's in English because the person who's working on that, all of it needs to be accessible to the members of your congregation. So we're talking about it needing to be in whatever the languages are that work for your congregation.
Well, they already speak the language. But diversified congregation. Everyone speaks.
If everybody speaks it, it's fine. But we don't. Some of our congregations, that's not the case. Some of our congregations, people are only fluent in one language. They can get by in the other, but they're only fluent in one. And here we're talking about technical language. So if that's the case, then you need to make it accessible. And again, it's not going to be required for every congregation, but there are several of our congregations where that's the case.
The book that we would be making up, you're saying if there's a reader, let them, should they read it, or do we make copies of this book and have on demand?
You can make your manual accessible in one of several ways. You can put it on your website if you want it out there with if you have a website with a passcode where only members can get on, and put it there. Or you can give appropriate sections to people, so when you sign up to greet, you automatically email out that page.
Okay.
For your session, I would urge you to either give your current session members, when you have it done, a hard copy or an electronic copy of the manual. So your session members should pretty much have all your policies, so that if they get a question, well, what do I do to greet? Oh, well, let me give you, they can go actually and pull it up, and let me give you this page and explain it to you. All right?
The disaster preparedness thing we're supposed to have?
Yes, that should be in there as well. Other questions? All right.